Ladies and gentlemen, this is Republic Reporters here in New York City, and we have a great revolutionary here in terms of a global revolutionary and local revolutionary here in New York City, Carl Dix. Ladies and gentlemen, he works with Cornell West, a prominent professor, one of the universities in the U.S., basically. Is that Princeton?
No, he's at Union Theological
Seminary.
In Harlem.
Okay, Harlem. And he'll be talking to us today about context in terms of global revolutionaries around the world, and particularly locally here as well as globally. Sir Carl Dix, welcome to Republic Reporters.
Thanks for having me on.
We are pleased to have you. And when did you start revolutionary? When did you get involved?
I got involved in the late 1960s. During the period of the Vietnam War and the uprisings of black people against their oppression. I got drafted into the military in the late 60s. Got orders to go to Vietnam in 1969. And myself and 5 other U.S. soldiers refused to go to Vietnam. Collectively, we became known as the Fort Lewis Six. I was given 2 years in Leavenworth Military Penitentiary for refusing orders to Vietnam.
Wow.
And it was during that period that I became a revolutionary. I came out of prison looking to hook up with other revolutionaries, and I ended up being a founding member of the Revolutionary Communist Party, the party led by Bob Avakian.
Bob Avakian. Who's Bob Avakian? Who is it?
Bob Avakian is the leader of the Revolutionary Communist Party, and he's a revolutionary. Goes back a little bit farther than me. He goes back to the earlier in the 1960s, the free speech movement out in Berkeley, California, and in digging for like what's the source of the problem and how do we get out from under it. He became a revolutionary and a communist. He was a leader in forming first the Revolutionary Union out in California, and then in the formation of the Revolutionary Communist Party, a party nationwide in this country that was working to emancipate humanity, to make revolution and contribute to making revolution around the world, and to getting rid of capitalism and imperialism, putting power in the hands of the people and leading people in transforming society, the world, and themselves until exploitation, oppression, and everything associated with capitalism has been done away with.
That's interesting. You know, I heard the word communism. You remember the Cold War era between the United States, capitalist states where we live in, and the former Soviet Union before its collapse in 1989. Basically, I remember around that age, that time. And people seems to be very sensitive when they hear communism because they believe that it was all about ideological struggle between the capitalist group and those who are in the communist group. It's all about power struggle. They still control. What do you think about that? Do you think that people are open to hear about communism? Or do you think, I mean, for example, let me give an example, like China. China seems to be moving into privatization, I don't know, but they still maintain some element of communism and still run some element of a capitalist open market economy. So it's happening in Russia as we speak right now. Not totally communism, not totally democracy, but basically they run something in between. What do you think about that? What do you think about reception?
Okay, well, first off, in terms of Russia and China today, neither of them are socialist or communist. In Russia, communism was actually the communist government and the government that was moving the society towards communism was overthrown following the death of Stalin. And from the late 50s on up to its collapse around 1989, 1990, they were capitalist imperialists, but still calling themselves socialists. So that's what was going on in the Cold War period. The social imperialists, socialism in words, imperialism in deeds, rulers of the Soviet bloc, were competing with the rulers of the U.S. bloc for global domination. That's what was going on.
Absolutely. That's what the point I was trying to make.
The U.S. imperialists made anti-communism a big part of how they carried this out in order to line people up behind their drive for world domination.
Be part of the propaganda, basically.
Now, China continued on the road to communism until the death of Mao Zedong in the mid-1970s. After his death, the people who worked closely with him trying to transform Chinese society to a socialist and ultimately a capitalist society got arrested, and China itself went on the road to capitalism. And what you have now in China is a party that calls itself communist is actually implementing capitalism. You look at the situation over there, and they're building sweatshops that are producing things for the global imperialist market. High-ranking people in the party are the ones who are the actual capitalists.
Wow.
You know, but they still call it communist because Mao and what he did has a lot of prestige among the Chinese people, so they're trying to use that prestige to fatten their pockets.
So basically it's a cover-up. Is that a cover-up? Is that what it is?
Yes, they're trying to cover that up. Now what Avakian has done is he has looked at both the successes of the socialist and communist governments in the Soviet Union and in China, but also their shortcomings. And based upon that, he's determined, well, the problem wasn't that socialism and communism isn't possible. They were not able to make it through this time because there was a great power in the imperialist world lined up against them. They did a lot of things right, but they also did some things wrong. And Avakian has identified what they did wrong and worked to break through on that.
What do you identify?
And developed
Give me an example.
new approach to revolution and communism. Now, in terms of what he has been able to come up with and break through on the understanding, one of the things that Marx talks about very early when he began to put communism together is getting to the point where there is no longer a need for government. Okay, now in working on that, what was being done was relying on the centralized government to develop socialism, and not enough getting that what needed to happen was unleashing the masses of people from different sections of society to grapple with the questions of the revolution and carrying it forward and continuing it. And from that, Avakian has determined that, okay, you need a revolution, you got to take power from the capitalists, and you have to replace that capitalist imperialist government with a revolutionary government intent on building socialism and moving to communism. But in doing that, and you have to hang on to power because the imperialists will try to come back. But the other thing that you have to do is that you have to unleash questioning, diversity, experimentation, and dissent, including from people who disagree with the revolutionary government. And that you have to do that because it's through that process that the greatest number of people are going to learn what the task of the revolution are and going to be able to take them up. It's not enough to have a revolutionary government that's taking up the task of the revolution. You have to involve the people as much as possible in this. And this is something that Avakian goes into in what he calls his new synthesis of communism, which is the new approach to it that I talked about. And you can get a flavor of that in his book, Basics, which is a collection of quotations and short essays from Avakian. Because one of the things, Mao did a lot of good work on this, but one of the things that Mao and the revolutionaries with him fell down on is that they tended to look at the intellectuals, people who had studied, went to college and all like this, as, well, these people are going to be a problem because most of society doesn't have that college background, that intellectual background. And so these people had certain privileges, and Mao tended to see them as, well, we got to hold down those privileges, and not seeing that we needed to unleash that section of society too, because they could actually help spearhead this thing of looking into, investigating things, and even raising dissent, because even people who disagree with you can raise something that you need to know, and if you suppress them, you won't learn what you could learn from them. You might learn from them you're doing something wrong.
Absolutely, absolutely.
You know, and if you suppress them, and the people who are with you might not be the ones who will raise to you that you're messing up.
If I may stop you right there to just
okay.
Let's get some clarity. You know,
okay.
The concept communism and socialism. I know communism we talked about. According to the concept, it talked about control of resources and industrial production by the people, but controlled by a central government. Talking about former Soviet Union, the Kremlin and the Duma, lower house and the House of Deputies. But at the same time, could you clarify, for our audience who are listening to the reporters right now, how do you differentiate communism and socialism? What's the difference?
Okay, let me start by what communism actually is, because what communism actually is a world where the exploitation and oppression of capitalism has been done away with. They're no longer a division of society into the haves and the have-nots, with the haves controlling all the wealth and power. No longer are there economic relations that flow from that, where most of society has to work for a handful of people who get profit from the labor of a great majority of people. Pay. Yes. So those economic divisions are done away with. The class divisions in society don't exist anymore. And then the social relations.
Classless society?
Yes, a classless society. A classless world. Then the relations where one nation dominates much of the world, where whites lord it over black people and other oppressed nationalities, where men have, dominate and suppress women. Those are also done away with, as well as the backward ideas that flow from the capitalist imperialist setup and help keep all of this oppression and exploitation in effect. That's what communism is. Now, socialism is the transition period after you make the revolution. You can't go to communism right away.
Why not?
You can't, because first off, you have to work to transform the economic relations from individual ownership of the factories, the mines, the large farms, and you have to change people's thinking. Because the people who make the revolution are going to grow up under capitalism. They're going to be influenced by capitalism's approach to things.
So basically,
that outlook is going to be out there, but they're going to hate the way they're treated, and you can bring them forward. They can make revolution, but then they have to change their mindset. They have to get to the point where it's not even just a thing of everybody gets treated equally. We actually have to get beyond that. We have to get to the point where everybody contributes as much as they can to society and gets back what they need. And see, people will probably start out at the beginning of the revolution more figuring, well, if you and me contribute the same amount, we should get back the same amount. And that's an important advance, because right now, the people who mostly do the work don't get anything, and the people who don't do any work, the capitalists, get the most. But we got to get beyond that, because what if you got 6 kids and I'm single? We both work in the same job. If we both get the same amount of money for that job, I'm doing a lot better than you, because you got 6 kids and a wife. I'm single. Well, we want to get to the point where it wouldn't be no problem for me that you get more than I get for doing the same job, because I would understand you need more than me. I don't really need as much as you.
How? I mean, what do you mean? But you work for it. I mean, you worked hard to make that money to put.
But see, that's not the point. That's not the point. The point we have to get to is that society as a whole has to see that people have to get what they need. And
who dictates that? Who dictates that? There has to be a government in place.
No, there needs to be a government that administers it to make sure that everything
is fair and square.
Runs together.
Okay.
But the people have to get to the point where they no longer are looking at it like, I need to get mine and he needs to get his. They need to look at it like, we need to get what we need. That we, as opposed to me. That's the outlook change that has to happen. And you can't instantly do that. You can't make people look at it that way. You have to change people's thinking by changing the situation there. And they got to get to the point where they realize, oh, we're no longer in a dog-eat-dog situation.
Yeah, you sound
I don't have to worry about the next man or the next woman stabbing me in the back. need to view it like, hey, he's got 6 kids. He got to get more than me. Because
you're sounding more like a Panfreire. I don't know if you read his book.
Sound like who?
The Panfreire. Panfreire is a former minister of Brazil. He wrote a book, Pedagogy of the... No.
Oh, Paulo Freire?
Paulo Freire, yeah, exactly.
Oh, Pedagogy of the Oppressed.
Of the Oppressed, exactly.
Okay.
I'm hearing you because...
I know who you mean.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, he was talking about that when you live in an oppressive society and you want to make a change, basically you have some of the elements of the capitalist mentality and oppressive tendencies that you carry on even without knowing it. And for you to make a change or to turn things around, you have to begin to re-educate and re-socialize and re-educate the society and the population for them to make that transition. That's what I'm hearing you say. I don't know if I'm correct.
Okay. Paulo Freire's book was actually a very important book in the 1960s in helping some people get a more radical and even revolutionary approach. A scientific communist approach, though, goes beyond Paulo Freire's book because it understands that we have to change the material conditions in order to make the changes in people's thinking possible. It isn't just people need to think different, but the conditions that people are in actually have to change. To give you an example, just talking about, say, stop and frisk.
I was going to come to that.
I know we're going to come. Let me throw this in. Because when we made the call to do something about stop and frisk in the fall of 2011, I was out in Harlem handing out flyers around it, and everybody I ran across just about didn't like stop and frisk. But the other thing they thought was there was nothing you could do about it, so they didn't even see the point of trying. And it wasn't until we actually did this and dozens of people went out there, about 30 some of us got arrested, and there were like hundreds of people out there in support of us. And when people saw that, they were like, oh, maybe we could do something about it. So we had to actually do something to change the conditions, show people that there was resistance, and show people that people who weren't here in Harlem getting stopped and frisked actually cared that that was happening. Because if you live in the projects in Harlem, you would be thinking, well, nobody cares what happens to me. I'm up here on my own. And to hear Cornel West say, we are doing this, young brothers and sisters, because we love you. We are concerned about you. We don't want to see you abused by this system. To hear him say that, to hear a Jewish professor get up there and say, I'm going to get arrested today because I want to stop and frisk, and I know that I'm not somebody who would be stopped and frisked. The cops wouldn't mess with me, but I know since they would mess with black brothers and sisters, then I have to do something about it. People seeing that begin to open up for them. This could be different. And that's what I mean by you have to change the conditions in order to open up the possibility for people to change their thinking. And that's why we in the Revolutionary Communist Party take an approach that we call fighting the power and transforming the people for revolution, trying to see what are the big questions that people need to fight around and uniting with them to take that on, all the while as they stand up and raise their heads, working to get them to see what the source of the problem is, this capitalist system and everything it's doing to people here and around the world, and what the solution to that problem is. Revolution and moving towards socialism and communism.
I mean, you know, that this reminds me about King's Day, the holidays coming up.
Okay.
Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, a lot of great guys, Malcolm X, did a lot of job to better this country in terms of civil disobedience and, you know, reacting to a lot of policies that were actually against the population of this country, called the United States of America, and particularly New York State or New York City went through that a lot. And we understand you're doing a program right now where you're sitting in court because of this frisk and such. And you've done that with Cornel West. He came down here in Harlem to do this. How is that going? You want to tell us about that?
Okay. Well, when we did the protests around stop and frisk, we started up here in Harlem. We did the first one in October of 2011 here in Harlem. Then in November of 2011, we did one in Brownsville in Brooklyn, and then police precinct in Jamaica, Queens, the precinct where the cops who murdered Sean Bell, they shot 50 shots at him and his friends in the car. So we decided to do those 3. Dozens of us got arrested. That actually helped to change what people were thinking about, saying about stop and frisk, and what they were willing to do. Now, what happened after we did that is that the government came back at us. They put us on trial in Manhattan.
Really?
Then they put us on trial in Queens. They're going to put us on trial in Brooklyn. The Manhattan trial, we got a lot of media attention. Everybody was paying attention to that trial. On that one, they just...
When was that?
That was in May of last year.
Last year, okay.
May of 2012. In that trial, they just said, all right, pay court costs. We won't send nobody to jail. But then in the Queens trial, they had us facing charges that would have put people in jail for a year.
What are the charges?
The charges were obstruction of governmental administration, 2 counts of it, each carrying a year in addition to disorderly conduct. So in other words, what they were basically saying is, oh, y'all not only did this once, but you kept doing it. We're going to stop you from doing it because we're going to throw your butt in jail. We're going to put you behind in jail around this.
That's crazy.
So we had to wage a struggle around that. And what we had going for us, they had a video of what we did. So the jury is sitting there watching the video of us marching into the police precinct in front of it, going, we won't stop till we stop, stop, and frisk.
Right.
And we are all Sean Bell, NYPD, go to hell.
Right.
And they watched that and they saw that, well, what these people did is they did a political protest against stop and frisk.
Absolutely.
They were talking about the police murdering
and
this young brother.
Right. Mm-hmm.
What was wrong with that?
Nothing.
So they wouldn't go for the heavy charges. Now the jury, they messed up on one thing. We talked to one of the jurors afterward and they said, well, we decided y'all didn't do nothing wrong. So we didn't want y'all to get in no trouble or go to jail. So we said we'll go vote for innocent on the heavy charges. And then we'll convict you on the disorderly because they won't send you to jail for that. Well, actually, they should have just found us not guilty on all of them if they thought we didn't do nothing wrong.
Okay.
So what the judge did is, because we were convicted on the one charge...
Which is what?
Disorderly conduct.
Okay.
Which was basically that we didn't leave when the cops told us to leave.
Okay.
But the thing is, if we weren't doing anything wrong, why was the cops telling us to leave? And that's the thing. But, you know, like I said, the jury didn't work that part through well enough. So the judge does this thing of, he says, Mr. Dix, you were arrogant. And because of that, I'm going to sentence you to 5 days of court observation.
Is it he or she?
It was a he.
Oh, yeah. And what does it mean that you're arrogant?
What did he mean by that? No, he didn't explain. And I've asked him since to explain because I went to the court for 2 days to watch. And he would not explain. But what it comes down to is that I came into his court and I said, we determined that stop and frisk was racist, unjust, and illegitimate. It needed to be stopped, and that we were going to act to stop it.
That's right.
I said that at the beginning of the trial. I also said, after I had been convicted of disorderly conduct, that stop and frisk is still racist, is still unjust and illegitimate. We were right in what we did. The city is wrong in terms of stop and frisk, and I didn't go to the point of the judge, but he probably got the implication that if the city was wrong to enforce stop and frisk, that I probably felt he was wrong to be up here sentencing me.
She was for the city.
Yeah. So I think that's where he saw the arrogance in there. And so he was going to put me under his thumb and give me some kind of lesson. I did go there for 2 days. Okay. Then he ended it. Earlier this week. Okay. The beginning of this week I went, for Monday and Tuesday. And what happened was, the first day I went, 6 other people came with me because we put the call out to say...
That's right, to join.
Join Carl Dix in this court observation. He's trying to single Carl out. Let's show him that we stand with Carl. So 6 people came with me on Monday. 8 people came with me on Tuesday. And I think he could see where this was going.
That's right. The number was increasing.
And that if he kept bringing me back,
then be more large population would be in the court.
In the court.
Right.
So he was kind of like, okay, all right, you're done. That's it. And I'm supposed to write him my experiences in court. And I'm going to write it because what you see when you sit in the court, the first thing that leaps out at you is that if you're in the court in Queens, there are people from all over the world.
All over the world.
Being brought
Global
in.
population.
There's black people and Latino people from here in New York City, but then there's also black people from Africa, from the Caribbean. There are Latino people from Colombia. From Argentina.
The whole Latin America.
There are people from Bangladesh, people from Pakistan, people from India. They're bringing in translators, people from China. They had to bring in a Chinese translator once. They had to, several times, they had to bring in somebody who spoke different South Asian languages. They had to bring in somebody to speak Urdu. One time, they needed somebody to speak Bengali to talk to people in addition to the Spanish translation that was needed. Now, the one grouping of people that you didn't see very much of as defendants in that courtroom were white people.
You're kidding.
Very few white people. Because the second day I was there, I numbered them the second day. The first day I didn't number them because I didn't realize how many it was going to be. The second day, though, I numbered them. He saw 90 cases with about 95 defendants because some of the cases had multiple defendants. Out of that, there were 4 white people. And the other 91 people
of color
were black, Latino, South Asian, East Asian. And then the other thing that struck me was that a lot of the cases that came in were cases where people had problems amongst themselves, called the government in, and the police ended up arresting somebody. And we need to get to a society where people can handle those problems amongst themselves on their own. You know, and that's one thing. We addressed this in a draft constitution that we've developed for a future socialist republic in North America. How we could get to a point where, first off, those who are entrusted with safety and law enforcement would not be like the cops today who use that position to suppress, brutalize, and even murder people. Well, we would have people who would sooner risk their own life than kill or injure an innocent person. But the other thing is we'd be working to get to the point where more and more there would be neighborhood committees, and where if a family had a fight, instead of some police coming and arresting somebody, the folks in the neighborhood would be like, okay, what's this fight about?
Oh, okay.
Why y'all fighting? I mean, look, y'all supposed to be in this together.
Community mediation.
You got married. I mean, if there's a problem, you don't have to stay married, but just beating each other up.
Doesn't
this
make
ain't
sense.
gonna go.
Yeah.
You know, there was one case where, and see, the reason I know that this were these problems amongst each other is that you could tell they would say, "and the order of protection." And that's what that would tell you that it started from a personal conflict.
Right, okay.
In one case, they even had a mother who took out an order of protection on her daughter.
That's crazy.
Now, they live together. They have to live together because the daughter can't support herself. But one has an order of protection on the other. And you need a society where society can assist in dealing with those problems, and people aren't taking it out like brother isn't beating up the sister that he's married to or living with, daughter isn't beating up the mother, or two people aren't getting into fights all the time. And so that's the kind of world we need to live in, and it points to the fact that we need a revolution, because as long as we're in a world like this one, people are going to be driven, you know, to have those problems amongst each other, because the question, one, of their survival is very much up for grabs. And we see that as coming from the fact that this society really has no future for people in the inner cities.
Wow.
The jobs that they used to be able to work have been sucked out of those communities and shipped halfway around the world, because they can pay somebody in Bangladesh to work in a garment factory a couple dollars a day, whereas they had to pay people here like $7, $8 an hour minimum wage to do the same job. So they can make a whole lot more money shipping the jobs over to Bangladesh. They can work people in much more dangerous conditions. I don't know if you remember hearing about the fires in the garment factories in Bangladesh.
Yes, even in China.
That were making produce, you know, clothes and stuff for Walmart and other things like that.
Yep.
Well, see, they could work them in those conditions and lock the factory, and fires would start and the people couldn't get out, because even if all those people in that factory died in the fire, they would just go out and get some more people, because there are more poor people there who would work for $1 or $2 a day. So that's what's happening. And then the education system is being geared to fail our youth. The only thing they have for these youth is hanging on the corner, getting involved in some hustle, whether legal or illegal, and then they got cops sweating them 24/7, stopping and frisking them, harassing them, disrespecting them, brutalizing them, and even arresting them. And see, that serves as the pipeline to warehousing people in prison, mass incarceration. So what this actually comes down to is tens of millions of people, and mostly blacks and Latinos, caught up in the web of the criminal injustice system. We call that a slow genocide, because those groupings of people are in positions where, and this is the international definition of genocide, where as a group or in sections of the group, they are are held in conditions that do not allow them to survive and thrive. Because most people think of genocide, they think of the end point, when people start getting killed. You know, that's what they think about in Germany with Jewish people during World War II. Right. They think about, well, they put them in the camps and started killing them. But if you study that, what you'll find is that genocide began well before people were being put in camps. Began with identifying the Jewish people, demonizing them, separating them from the rest of society, stealing their property, and then, after years of doing that, then they get sent to the ghettos and then the camps where they were killed. Or you could even see that in some of the situations in Nigeria, when in the, I guess it was in the 1960s, massacres of Igbos began to happen.
That led to the Civil War
throughout the country, leading to the Biafran
War.
secession and the Civil War. But see, there was a past to that too. It didn't
just as well
happen all at once. There was a question of contradictions that began to develop, because the Igbo were civil servants a lot in different parts of the country.
They were everywhere.
Everywhere. And they began to be looked at as, well, they're the problem, when they weren't the problem. They were just people playing an administrative role in the government. Behind them, actually running the show, were the capitalist imperialists. But people could see and touch the Igbo. So when they had problems with what capitalism, imperialism was doing to them, they took those problems out on the Igbo.
Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, reporters, this is Carl Dix, ladies and gentlemen, talking to us about a lot of critical issues happening here and globally around the world. And today, this week, is actually Martin Luther King's holidays. And hearing you talk about stop and frisk in the city and the transatlantic slave trade and what it has turned into. And we want to ask you a question. Sir, do you think that the King's dream, whether it has come true, do you think it has been accomplished? Do you think whether we are close accomplishing it? Or do you think nothing has been accomplished since the dream speech by King in Washington, D.C. that happened in 1968, I think so?
Okay. King's dream was actually laid out in the 1963 March on Washington speech, the I Have a Dream speech. Right, that was 1963.
Yeah, thanks.
And his dream was one of the children of that generation of black people and the children of that generation of white people being able to unite irrespective of the differences in the colors of their skin. And the problem with that dream is that it did not see the reality behind why blacks and whites couldn't get together. And that reality was a white supremacist setup, and white supremacy whites having power and privilege over people of color was actually serving a capitalist imperialist economy, social system, and world. And if you're gonna deal with the subjugation that black people have faced, it's not just a thing of changing the way white people think and changing the way black people think. You actually have to target capitalism, imperialism, because that's what keeps all of that in effect. You know, you look at right now, black people are largely, and Latinos are caught up in the criminal justice system that I talked about, getting stopped and frisked, getting warehoused in prison.
High population.
When they come out of prison, they're openly discriminated against because they're ex-felons. But then what gets told to white people about that is, well, these people are the cause of crime. Well, so that gives them a sense that these things, the incarceration of the blacks and Latinos, is helping to keep white people safe. Well, that's not true. What it actually is the society has criminalized these people because, like I said earlier, they have no future for them. We have to break out of this. We have to get out of a situation where the society can criminalize people and get away with it.
How are you going to do that?
That's why.
How are you going to do it? I mean, my comments thought about building our own industries where you can control and manage by your own selves. And that's the only way you can be free. How are you going to do that when we don't really run our own industries? We still work under the transformed industries controlled by the white population. How are you going to do it?
See, here's what I'm trying to get to. The problem isn't white or black.
Okay.
It's capitalism, imperialism.
Well,
because
controlled by someone.
The main capitalist imperialists are indeed mostly white. However, most white people ain't capitalist and imperialist.
Sure.
They're actually getting exploited too by the same capitalist imperialist, but they think that they've got something going for themselves. So they line up with it. Far too many black people also line up with it, trying to get theirs within this setup. What we need to do is get people to see the setup for what it really is, that it is a class society. The capitalist imperialists are oppressing and exploiting everybody. There is white privilege in it, and we have to attack that white privilege politically, but not white people are the enemy and we have to fight them and get away from them. We actually need to get to a point where the factories, the mines, the means to create wealth are no longer the individual property of a handful of rich people. That is actually
a collective
social resources that should be socially owned and socially operated. Not to make profit for a handful of people, but to produce what people need. To do that, we have to have a revolution. And to get to the point where revolution could be possible in a country like this, we have to change people's thinking. We have to get people organized. And that takes me back to what I said earlier. Fight the power and transform the people for revolution.
Fight the power and transform the people for revolution.
That's why we're taking on stop and frisk and mass incarceration. Because we know how many people are being beat down by that. We can't stand by and let them get beat down. But even more than that, it is when people stand up and resist that they raise their heads and they open their minds to new ideas. And that's when we need to engage with them. Where is all this coming from? But
let me see, before you answer your own question, let me touch the multilateral cooperation, multinational cooperation, the oil industry, the gas, the iron, the gold, the diamond. Look at what is happening in Syria, what is happening in Libya, what is happening in Saudi Arabia, I mean not in Saudi Arabia, maybe Yemen, currently Nigeria. Multinational corporations are moving into these areas. In fact, they are fighting each other and arming militants to fight each other while they're taking away the resources, while the masses are being oppressed and dying under this massive looting going on in these countries. Libya, Syria, they're moving in there, and we didn't see it. What do you think is going on in Libya? What do you think is going on in Syria? What do you think is going on in Nigeria in terms of multilateral cooperation, its connection to the capitalists and the government, not only here in the United States, but the so-called big powers, the five powers in terms of the UN, the China, the British, the French, the Russians, of course, and of course the United States.
Germany.
Okay, well, if you can put Germany if you want. But what do you think is going on here? How do the population respond? Because they seem helpless.
Yes,
right now. Why is that?
They don't see the imperialists behind the scenes. What's been happening in the world, and especially in the Middle East, what they call the Middle East, the
Arab Spring, they call it Arab Spring or whatever. They call it Arab Spring.
Yeah, the oil-rich areas,
right?
Like
the Gulf oil states,
Gulf oil states,
right?
All like that. What has been happening is the U.S. has been moving since the invasion of Iraq to tighten its domination and its hold on that part of the world.
Wow.
Because one, that's a source of profit, but even more important than a source of profit is if they control the oil spigot in the oil-rich parts of the world, they can turn it on or off. Because the U.S. gets most of its oil here in the U.S. from Venezuela and Nigeria. That's the three largest sources of U.S. oil. They actually don't get that much oil from the Gulf states. But Europe gets all of its oil from the gas.
They collaborate. There's a collaboration
Japan
going on.
gets all of its oil.
From where?
From the Gulf states.
Wow.
If the U.S. has control over that oil, then they have control over Europe, over Japan. If they can shut China out, then they have more influence over China. That's what the U.S. has been doing. That's why they invaded Iraq. After September 11th, even though Iraq had nothing to do with September 11th.
Absolutely. Evidence shows
they thought if we could take over Iraq, put it under its thumb, then we could spread out from there and control the rest of that part of the world. It didn't work out for them that well. And in fact, what ended up happening was masses of people in the Arab countries beginning to rise up against the repressive regimes that the U.S. had mainly backed. Egypt, Tunisia, places like that. That's where they went up first. Yet, some of the Gulf states. Well, I mean, I forget the name of it. One of the Gulf states was a big uprising. And this happened actually before. Tunisia, but one of the Gulf states. I forget the name of it, but there's been a lot of uprising in there.
That's Yemen. Something going on in Yemen.
Qatar or something like one of those. Bahrain, that's the one. The one that the U.S. has a military base in. There was an uprising there as well. What the U.S. had to do then is they had to figure out, well, how do we stay in charge when our dictators, Mubarak and the guy in Tunisia, are falling? And they're trying to ride that out. At the same time, there were repressive regimes that weren't under the U.S. thumb. And that's what's happening with Libya and Syria. There were people who wanted to rise up against those regimes, and the U.S. said, we can back this because that'll get rid of somebody who's been a thorn in our side. So they wanted to get rid of Gaddafi, they wanted to get rid of Assad. So that's what they're doing. But
Russia is, on the other end, backing Assad because Russia has a strategic interest in Syria. And that's why the U.S. cannot go in there with space. So
some of the other countries don't have the same interest. There was nobody in position to assist Gaddafi, so they were able to get him. Sadat.
But Russia was upset.
Putin
was like
putting more into
Syria right now
situation. And then the other thing that's happening.
And they have a large population in Syria. More than a million in Syria.
As these uprisings opened up, some of the Islamist forces got involved in it. And the U.S. was trying to tighten its hold, but then these Islamist forces get in there and they don't want to go with the U.S. So it's creating, you know, they didn't want to see...
tension? I mean, there's a friction.
Yes. They didn't want to see the Islamic Brotherhood get the presidency in Egypt. But that's what ended up happening.
Absolutely. I mean, they
don't want to see some of the forces associated with...
in Libya either.
The Islamists in Libya, in Mali.
In Mali, right now in Mali, French is in Mali. What's going on in Mali? Do you have an idea?
Well, what's happening is some Islamist forces were able to topple the government. They took over much of the country, and
almost
from the perspective of the U.S., it's like, we can't let this go down because we've been trying to suppress these people. The French are actually the battering ram for it, but the U.S. is right behind them.
Well, that's a former territory, former satellite state of France. No, that's a French-speaking country.
It's a French-speaking country. France was the former colonial power there, but the U.S. is backing them up. You know, they're providing drones. They're going to be providing planes to move French troops around. But it's a very dangerous gamble because you don't know how that's going to work. Yeah,
but don't you see that there's a correlation between what is happening in Mali, the Tuareg, and what happened in Libya. These are some of the people who fought for Gaddafi, who actually left and came back to their own land, and with they're heavily armed and equipped. They had a lot of cash, and they're coming in back and in Algeria, in Nigeria, in Mali, and actually they're in northern Nigeria right now, what they call Boko Haram. So what do you think is going to happen? What's going to happen? Can they control this? What's going to happen?
They're trying to
what's
control
the link with this and revolution?
They're trying to control it. It's not. There's nothing that says they're going to be able to pull that off. But what needs to happen is the idea of not an Islamist force taking over, or getting with the imperialists and hoping that they will bring in a secular democracy. But the idea of revolution has to get back on the map the way it was in the 1960s and 70s.
How are you doing that in Mali?
That's something that we're working on. No, we're working on that from the end of building a movement for revolution here in this country and working to spread revolution and communism wherever we can around the world. We have issued a document, manifesto for a new initiators and a new stage of communism.
Okay.
And we're translating that into as many languages as we can. We're getting that out around the world. Different forces are looking at it, lining up with it, or arguing against it, because we want people to talk about it. This is a way for humanity to get out from under imperialism, not to end up under its thumb in one form or another. Because one thing about this Islamist revolution or takeover that people that are being pushed by some forces, you look at the situation like Iran. Iran is a country that the Islamists have run for decades now, since the late 1970s.
But the population is still suffering.
Not only is it suffering, Iran's economy is locked into the imperialist world, which means the imperialists can mess with it more, because Iran sells its oil to the imperialist countries.
Where do you want them to sell it? I mean, they have to sell it.
See, that's the thing. They would have to transform the approach there. Okay, we got this oil, but oil
you have to market it.
doesn't have to be how we go about stuff. What is it that our people need here? How do we produce the food?
Farming-wise, mechanical approach of agriculture.
How do we produce that, and how do we judiciously trade oil for that, as opposed to pumping oil to meet the needs of the world market, which then means if the imperialist control world market has a beef with you, then they say, well, we're not going to buy your oil. We put an embargo on it.
Absolutely.
And then it messes you up, because you've been relying on
them to
keep your economy going. You actually have to look at your economy from the thing of, what do we have to produce to meet the needs of people? And that's a shortcoming. That's the problem with the approach that the Islamists in Iran took. And it's also the problem with the approach that Chavez took in Venezuela. Because that's another oil-rich society that is based upon, we're going to sell oil to the imperialists. And again, you're going to do that only to the degree that the imperialists are willing to keep dealing with you on it. Because if they decide you're a problem, then they're going to say, well, we ain't going to buy your oil. And then that messes your economy up. And that's something that a genuine revolutionary approach has to look at it from. We're not trying to integrate ourselves into the imperialist economy. We're actually trying to break free from it. And what we're trying to do is produce what's needed for the people, for the revolutionary society. And that gives you a whole different approach, because you're not looking at it like, well, what's the product that we can sell to the imperialists, but what is it that our people need to meet their needs? And then you still have that oil, and you could say, all right, well, I'll sell some oil.
At some point.
At some point, I might sell it right now, but I ain't based on it. So you can say you don't want to buy it. That's cool. I don't need to sell it to you.
But you actually need dedicated individuals who are ready to run this program you're talking about revolution. Because sometimes revolutionaries, you have reactionaries within the revolution as well. Okay, look at Cuba. What do you think of Cuba? What do you think about Cuba?
Okay, well, actually, it's similar to what I was talking about Venezuela. Because if you look at the Cuban Revolution, Fidel, Che and the rest of them, when they rose up and kicked the U.S.-backed dictator out, that was a good thing.
Batistuta. Mm-hmm.
That was very important and very necessary. But then, because they were still up against the U.S. and its power, they looked for a sugar daddy. Who's going to back us up in this?
Soviet Union came in.
They went to the Soviet
Russians.
Union, who
claimed to be a communist.
They were social imperialists. Socialist in words, imperialist in deeds.
Whoa.
In the 1960s when this went down. So the Soviets came in to use Cuba as a base for its contention with the U.S., and the direction that the Cuban economy took was producing sugar for the world market. So again, what is it that we can produce that we could sell to the imperialists? Not what is it that the people here in Cuba need and how do we meet those needs? And because the Cuban economy got geared to the world market, then it rose and fell with how that market was going to treat it.
So how do you change the market? Because what I'm hearing you say is that don't trade to the capitalists. Don't deal with them. They're no good, they're evil, they're satanic. You can't really operate and run effectively when you're dealing with the capitalists. So how do you trade your goods and services among yourselves? At some point, you're going to be able to trade with other nation states.
Yes, but see, here's the thing.
How do you do that?
Don't rely on dealing with the capitalist imperialists.
Explain that to us.
What I mean by that is...
To our audience, basically.
I got you. I'm trying to do that. What is it that the people in the revolutionary society need?
Yes, sir.
How do we produce the food? How do we produce the medicine, the clothing, the housing? And also, depending upon the situation of your country, you may not be able to grow all the food.
Sure.
Or maybe you can grow more food than you need, but you can't produce all the medicine on your own.
Right.
Well, then you look for where can I make a trade with some other countries where I'm not gearing my economy to the imperialist dominated market. I'm gearing my economy to the needs of the people in this society, but I'm going to make a trade here because I have more food than I need but not enough medicine.
In that situation, what do you do?
That's an approach. Well, you look for who can provide medicine and needs food.
If it's a capitalist state, a capitalist society, what do you do?
You say, I will trade you some food for medicine.
But
I'm not going to let you.
I'm not capitalist.
I know, but see, that's what I meant by don't rely on.
But how do you?
Because your economy will not be based upon
them. Okay.
Them and working with them.
Okay.
Because if you base it on working with them, then they are going to use that
as a leverage
to control you.
Okay.
But if it's like, okay, well, mainly it's based upon we're going to be working here. We're going to be collectively working on it to produce the food, to produce medicine, to build the housing that we need, clothing, and then as in addition to being based on that, there's a medicine that we need that we can't produce here, but we got some extra food. Okay, so that's not the heart of your economy. They can't use that to control your economy. They can just decide we're going to trade with you or we ain't. And
don't you
look for who in the world actually needs the food and is willing to make a trade on the medicine and do it on relatively equal terms. That's what you have to do, so you're not beholden to whoever does it. They can't use that to control you because what you're basing it on is the actual revolutionizing of the society and at the same time working to support that same approach all over the world. And it's very much needed because we talk mostly about Northern Africa, but we could talk about the Congo.
Go ahead, Congo.
The Congo is actually one of the richest
in the world
areas in the world.
Not just the continent, the world.
Especially as the technology has developed. You know, because everybody got a cell phone, right?
Right.
The minerals and metals that are necessary for a cell phone, the best place in the world to get them
Congo
is in the central part of Africa where the Congo is. And that is why the Congolese state has been ripped apart. Because you have different imperialist countries backing different movements.
Militias.
militias, but also different African countries.
Absolutely.
And using those countries to get a piece of the Congo so that they can get the coltan and other precious minerals that are needed for this high-tech
production
industries that are the going thing in the world right now, and can get it for just about nothing because they ain't really got to pay nobody to work it. They just
rip it off.
in and rip it off.
But that's disheartening, you know, for the continent, because this is a land blessed with so much resources.
Yes, well,
you have forces coming in from Rwanda, from Burundi, from neighboring countries, Tanzania, being funded by multinational corporations and these capitalist states, you know, who go through them to disrupt.
Yeah, the U.S. government is behind some of this. I mean, let's just be clear. The U.S. government is behind Kagame. I forget which country he's in.
Rwanda?
Rwanda, yeah. And they're backing some of the militias, and the U.S. is getting the benefit of those minerals out of it. You know, other militias are backed by other forces. The French are in there. And it's almost like somebody was comparing this to, oh, actually you were, the 1884
Berlin Conference,
where they sat down and carved up Africa. Well, they are recarving and recarving it even today as we speak. It. And then they say, well, this shows that African people can't get their stuff together. It's their problem that they have a failed state, not actually getting at it's imperialism that is the cause of that. And it's revolution that's going to be the solution. And that's something that we have to
When will that happen? I mean, I've been hearing about this revolution since the 60s. It begins, it collapsed. I remember Thomas Sankara in Burkina Faso, a very great brother. He was assassinated. They funded and killed that brother. They took him away. There have been a lot of revolutionaries. Lumumba, Patrick Lumumba was a revolutionary.
I remember.
He was assassinated.
Patrice Lumumba.
A lot of. So how do you provide security? How are you going to set up a military? You need a military. You need the capacity to be able to protect the revolution. Otherwise, it will collapse. What do you do in this instance?
Need, see, before you need a military and security, you need a revolutionary movement and a revolutionary party to lead the revolution.
But that involves the military as well, the military wing.
No. And then that party develops a military approach and a strategy that is fit towards how revolution should be made in that country. And that's where your military wing comes from. And the reason I'm emphasizing this is because if you start with the military, then what goals are you fighting for? You have to start with what are we fighting for? Not we got to fight, but what are we fighting for?
I mean, just for security, not for fighting, for security.
And that thinking has to guide everything that you do. It has to guide your military forces. It has to guide your security. It has to guide your economic thinking. And if you're doing that, and see, that's been part of the problem, because in the radical movements in Africa, there was something that Kwame Nkrumah said that had too much influence in the approach that was taken. He said, seek ye first the political kingdom and everything will come behind that.
He said that? He said something like that?
He said that, and then he proceeded to become prime minister under still British control in the late 50s. The British used that control to devastate Ghana's economy. And by the 1960s, the early 1960s, when Kwame Nkrumah broke with the British, the country was bankrupt financially because all of that wealth that they thought they had in the Bank of London, because when Kwame Nkrumah became the mayor, Ghana was actually a very wealthy country, and their wealth was
kept. They had gold.
Their wealth was kept in the Bank of London.
Why did he do that? Why would he keep his wealth in London?
Because at that point...
He didn't know better?
At that point, he did not realize that imperialism was what had held back the development of Africa. It was more like, well, we had to get to the point where we Africans could run our own country. No, that wasn't it at all. You had to get these imperialists off your back. But he didn't have that view. That's why he said, seek ye first the political kingdom, by which he was saying, I'm doing the right thing by being appointed prime minister by the British. And at the same time, the brother in Guinea, Sékou Touré, was fighting against the French. And Guinea was the first country, and actually the only country in the French zone, what they call the Francophone zone,
Francophone countries,
that went for independence. And the French had this thing where they said, okay, anybody want to have independence, they can have it, but it'd be much better for you to stay with us. And what they did when Guinea chose independence, they even took the phones out the wall. I mean, they stripped the country of everything they could take in order to make it hard for the country to thrive.
And introduce a system of assimilation.
Initially, people were thinking, well, Kwame Nkrumah took the correct path. He's stuck with Britain, and they're going to, you know,
be friends,
transition, and that'll be good. And they have all this money in the Bank of London. When Kwame Nkrumah got, after about 5 or 6 years, he was like, this ain't the way to go. I'm breaking with y'all and send me back the money that y'all got in the Bank of London.
It didn't happen.
They sent him a bill.
Wow.
They said, all your money is gone. And he was like, where'd it go? They had basically stole it from him. But then they had paperwork showing, oh, well, this happened and that happened and this happened and that happened. We funded
this, we did that, we did this.
You know, and nobody in Africa knew any of that was being done, but all the money had been spent by the Bank of London. So Ghana was then bankrupt, and Kwame couldn't figure out what to do. And then it was at that point that he started developing a more radical approach. But his position and his party was not based upon that radical approach.
He came back later.
So he did not have a party to carry out that view.
He came lately. It was late,
and
basically.
That's why they were able to overthrow him and get rid of him.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. We just want to let you know the public reporters here with Carl Dix, touching a lot of issues from Stop and Frick here in the city, and talking about the multinational corporations. We've been able to touch a lot of global issues in terms of sweatshops in China, India, Bangladesh, what's going on in Syria, Mali, Nigeria, and a lot of places. Ladies and gentlemen, we are so privileged to meet a revolutionary who are still putting things together, give us an ideas and synopsis on how this could be done and make it effective.
Okay, let me give a website.
Yeah, go ahead, sure.
People who want to get more into this, and especially check out some of the material that I talked about, basics, the draft constitution for a future socialist republic in North America, the manifesto for a new stage of communist revolution.
Okay.
They can go to the website www.revcom.us. That is REVCOM.us.
Ladies and gentlemen, you heard it. Dix, thank you so much. Is there anything else you want to, wrapping up? Anything else you want to...
just they can check out some of what I've written about police murder, police brutality, mass incarceration, all of that kind of stuff. And they especially can check out the writings of Bob Avakian.
Avakian, and Bob Avakian, is he talking tonight? I know you guys have a dinner tonight.
No, he's not talking tonight. We're having a potluck. The revolutionaries up here in Harlem are pulling that together.
God, this is a privilege talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.